from him. So yeah, so I kind of heard about Luca for the first time when I attended Nudge Talk, the same one as Louise did. There were two. So if you can search out, you can search out a video on YouTube called it's a video I uploaded called the Top 18 Takeaways. It's my Nudge Stock review. And there were two presentations that were head and shoulders above everything else. Everything was very high quality. But the two that really impressed me were Luca's presentation on incentives, which I'll talk a little bit about. And then there was Google also did something very impressive where they took what most people think of as the customer journey, and they recognized that whilst there's a start or a trigger, and then there's an ending, which is normally a buy moment, the middle is not as linear as many people say. It's very messy, and they kind of showed a way of approaching that to understand that correctly. Just bear with me. My LinkedIn just went up. I was wondering if that is Luca messaging us. Oh, let's have a quick look here. Oh no, I see that's Louis sending the message to him. So to go back to Luca, so I contacted him, and he mentioned that he had this book coming out, the Control Heuristic. It was the second edition at the time. So I told him I'd review it on my channel, and there's a review of the book with my top 10 takeaways, if that helps any of you after today's chat with Luca. The thing that really impressed me about it was that there was so many useful insights that came out of the book. It was very difficult to condense them down into a top 10. His speech at Nudge Talk was about incentives, and essentially talking about how when we get an incentive offered to us, we store that information in two different ways. We can store it as a piece of knowledge, or we can store it as an emotional association. And Luca will tell you a little bit more about that now because he has just joined. So Luca, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Yes, hello everyone. Apologies for being late. My computer just restarted in the worst possible moment. Hi everyone. Thank you for inviting.
Well, Luca, we're really glad to have you here
Luca. Hello, Luca. I'll just jump in there now. I've introduced you to the group, and as I said to everybody, we're very pleased to have you joining us today. I've given them a little bit of background about both the work that you do, about how I personally came across you through Nudge Talk, which was Michael echoed that experience, and I've given a little outline about the aim of, particularly we're talking about the control heuristic today, but we can deviate into all of your different interests. And I've welcomed Michael to join us, who's, as you know, very interested in the work that you do, Luca. And Michael's now going to take over and put a couple of questions to you.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you, and hi, Michael. It's nice to see you.
You too, Luca. You too. Okay, so let's get started then. So the first thing that I'd like to ask you is, I'm very fascinated where people like you appear from. Like, what were the circumstances that led you to do all of the research that you have? There must be a huge fire that's burning inside you that drives you towards all of these different subjects, you know, complexity theory, human behavior theory, ergodicity, which I haven't read, but I picked that one up on Kindle recently. Just tell us your story. Like, I'm very interested in all of the pivotal moments through your life that led you to where you are right now.
Yeah, so I've always been very curious person. Like, I remember when I was 6 years old and they had to operate me on the tonsils, like I was asking the doctors everything. And then I kept this curiosity and I began my career working for a consulting company in Frankfurt, Germany. And we were mostly doing consulting on operational excellence and safety in the workplace. In theory, it was a very restricted field. But actually, what I discovered is that to do the job well in that field, there are so many things you need to know. Because, like, for example, even if your expertise is in making sure that the operations of a plant are safe, unless you understand all the financial incentives, the politics, element of psychology, and so on and so forth, you will not be able to understand exactly why something happens. And sometimes it's okay because you're not really interested in the why. But if you are curious in the why, I think that you need to understand like all the factors that can influence the decisions. You cannot just draw an arbitrarily an arbitrary box. And so I began to study a lot of things and to ask questions about to a lot of people in different fields. And then at some point, I thought that I knew enough of my job. So I quit the company and I began doing it by myself. But then when I did that and I moved back to my hometown in Italy and began working by myself, I discovered that actually one of the nice things that working in a company gives you is that the company finds clients for you. And instead, when I began working by myself, the bottleneck was finding clients. And so during the first months, I had a lot of free time on my hands. Like I would have some clients to work, but it wouldn't busy my day, let's say. So I began working on my research. And at the time, I stumbled on two, let's say, fields of research that influenced me very much. One is hierarchical temporal memory, which is a framework for artificial intelligence. And the interesting thing is that they see the brain as distributed computing units. So they see that they recognize that in the brain, there, even though there is the impression that we take the decisions as if we were a central unit, in reality, what happens is that our brain is made of regions, and the regions are made of neurons. And that's the level at which decisions get taken. And then, of course, there are some, let's say, some mechanisms that ensure that we only take one action, one decision. But the decisions are taken like distributedly, and that's something that then is probably the main theme of the book, The Control Heuristic. And then the second thing that influenced me quite a lot was that I began first studying autism. And I began studying it just because I was very interested, and I found it like interesting problem to study because we have quite knowledge of what the symptoms are, or let's say what are the behavioral implications, but we do not really know why. We do not know very much what are the causes of autism and so on. And so I began studying it, and from there I began studying a few other let's say, behaviors that affect only part of the population. And that gave me other big insights. So for example, I began to discover like the circuitry of the basal ganglia. And that's basically the second big topic that influenced the control heuristic. And then I began basically doing a lot of research, independent research on the side. And yeah, the rest of my days, I still do consulting. Yeah.
Thank you. And I just pulled a book off my shelf while you were talking, because when you talked about, you obviously done a lot of research into and probably have your own theories about autism. This guy that wrote this book, have you come across this one before? He's, let me try and move this.
Yeah. I thought I didn't read it.
Okay, yeah, because I figured that might either align with what you're doing or maybe might add to it. But yeah, it was all the idea of us trying to predict everything. Our brains are machines to try and predict everything. Okay, very good. So I did have a second question that I wanted to go to, but I wanted to just follow on from something you just mentioned about the brain having these distributed regions. So in the control heuristic, I believe this is some of the earlier chapters we talk about local coherence versus global coherence. So could you talk a little bit about that and maybe some examples of where you might see that, maybe to do with human behavior?
Yes, so usually I make the example of the brain as a company. So the brain is made of different brain regions. And the way they communicate is similar as in a company. And you can imagine that each employee is a region. Each region of the brain is an employee of the company. And in this example, the employees, they can only communicate through reports. So what happens is that each employee receives a different flow of data from the real world, and they write a report about what they perceive, what they think that is happening in the world or in the company, and then they send the report to other employees. And other employees read the reports and so on. And there are two interesting things. The first one is that each employee has only access of the reports of other employees, but not the raw data that employee used to write the report. So if one employee has incomplete data and takes a conclusion, what the other employees see is only the conclusion. So they will believe that the conclusion is correct. They will assume that it's correct unless they get two different conclusions, two opposing conclusions. And that's basically what happens with a lot of illusions, for example. So what happens with illusion is that one region of the brain has incomplete data, but if the data that it receives leads it to a conclusion, we might believe that the conclusion is correct. And we only notice that the conclusion is incorrect if we get two completely opposing conclusions. Like if an employee reads two reports which say two opposing things. However, if the reports, they say the same thing, even if the reports, they contain mistakes or they contain details which are incompatible, we will not notice. And that's what happens with a lot of illusions. Illusions, they have details which are incompatible, but if on the wall it makes sense that we are seeing something, then we will believe that it is correct. Or at least we will have this sense of correctness, which is why illusions feel so awkward. And that's interesting because it means that opposing beliefs can coexist in the brain. And we see it in a lot of examples in our life. So for example, I can believe that I exercise a lot, that my diet is healthy. And then I can also believe that I'm overweight, that I'm slightly overweight. And the two beliefs, logically, they're incoherent. Like rightly, if I'm overweight, then it means that that what I eat is not perfect. However, a lot of people, they can hold the two beliefs and not see the incoherence unless you really press them. And that's because those two beliefs, they are held in two different regions of the brain, or in the same region of the brain, but in two different contexts. And unless we make deliberate effort, they can coexist. And that's one of the things, one of the tenets of the control heuristic is that, or of the book, is that there is no requirement for coherence in our brain. And coherence comes usually from deliberate effort. But unless we do the deliberate effort, we really sit down and try to look for coherence, then it's completely okay that we have incoherent beliefs. And the other big example that I make is that decisions do not have to be coherent with actions. And actually, the part of our brain that takes decisions is very different from the part of our brain that decides whether we take action on our decisions. So it's completely possible that my cortex, now I'm making some simplifications, but that the cortex decides that I should exercise today, that it's rational for me that the next thing I do today is to exercise. And then the basal ganglia, which is the part that, let's say, relays the orders to the motor areas of my brain, decides, nah, I don't feel like running. And that's perfectly okay because they are two different areas and they do not have to be coherent. They take decisions on different parameters. And so what I'm saying in the introduction of the control heuristic is that when most people, they think that they have a decision-making problem, usually they have an action-taking problem. Like a lot of people, they take decisions correctly, or they know what they should do, but then there is the other part of the brain, which should take action on our decisions, and that's the one that's the bottleneck, or that's the one that is preventing us from doing what we already decided to do.
Yeah, and I touched on this just before you arrived. I was talking about your nudge stock presentation, where you basically talked about ways to get around that. You were saying that it's well and good having the knowledge, but you need some kind of an emotional association. Do you have any tips on how someone might do that in a behavioral change environment where they could use some tactics or techniques to enhance the likelihood to take the action, somehow plugging it in with emotions?
Yes, so the basic criteria is that we must have had an emotional experience that suggests us that the outcome of the action will be positive. And then, of course, like what this means might mean a lot of different things, but one idea is that we must have experience on our hands that doing something makes sense. So in the nudge talk presentation, I make the example of washing hands. And for example, at the time COVID just started, and it's obvious to everyone that it's good to wash hands. And yet a lot of people, they do not wash hands. Why? Because even though they know that it makes sense to wash hands, they didn't experience the benefit of washing hands. And so one thing that I was suggesting is you just, for example, take an onion and you rub it on your hands, and then you smell your hands and they're very smelly. And then you wash your hands very slightly, 1 second under the water, like a lot of people used to do after using the toilet, for example. And then you put again your smell again, and you can still smell the onion. And then bam, that's a way in which you realize on your own skin, and maybe you even feel a bit bad, or that actually you're still smelling. And that could be one of the things that that will get you to actually do it. And yeah, now I'm saying a big simplification, which is not technically correct, but just to give you the idea. The idea is, if you experience that the action will bring a big discharge in dopamine, then you will do it. If not, you will not do it. Now, it's not technically correct, but that's the idea. And sometimes you can get it through indirect experiences. For example, you hear an emotionally touching story of your sister that she didn't wash her hands, and then she got sick, or I don't know, something like that. And that might be enough, because it might create an emotional experience. But that's the thing. If you had an emotional experience that told you that doing that is good, or that not doing it is bad, then you will do it. And if not, knowledge alone, analytical knowledge will not be enough to drive action.
Yeah, and a few comments coming in on the chat thread there about related to that as well. I see someone else mentioned dopamine. I would like to encourage everybody to start leaving comments, because I think me and Luca are going to rattle through what we had talked about pretty quickly. So if you've got any questions, we'd love you to post them so that Luca has time to answer them. So I want to move into the area now that was the biggest insight for me when I read the Control Heuristic. It sent me down a rabbit hole, and that was the work that you did on moods. You mentioned moods briefly. You referenced paper, which I then went and read. And then after having my mind blown by that, I went and read the book, The Origin of Everyday Moods. I saw the model that the author presented. I then saw his follow-up book called Calm Energy, where the science had finally caught up with his theories, and he had to tweak it a little bit. That whole model is fascinating to me, especially as someone in customer experience. In the customer experience world, everyone focuses a lot on emotion. I'm now starting to change my mind, and I'm starting to think mood might be a lot more important than emotion. So what I'd love you to do is just talk a lot about the research that you've done that was covered not only in the Control Heuristic, but apparently there's been some new research that you've talked about in ergodicity that kind of challenges that idea of loss aversion. So I'd love to hear all about that.
Yes, so I will just give the example that I give in the book about moods, because I think it's very good. So the idea is that it's irrational to be moody, up to a certain point, of course, because like being extra moody is problematic, but having a bit of mood, it's good. And the idea is, let's imagine that you have in the past, you have two people, Alice and Bob, that go to collect berries. And Alice can feel moods, and Bob does not feel any mood. And the question is, which one of them will collect more berries? And the answer is Alice. Because what Bob does, he doesn't have any mood, so he just goes to all the berries, all the bushes, and he lifts the bush and check whether there is a berry. And if there is a berry, he collects it. If there is no berries, he moves to the next bush. And he keeps doing it. Instead, what Alice does is much smarter. She has moods. So if she lifts the bush and there is no berries, she will feel discouraged and she will keep walking for a bit without checking the bushes. And then she checks again another bush, and maybe she feels she sees the berries and she collects them, and then she gets excited, and then she checks the bush which is next to it. And now in the real world, what happens is that the berries, they are not equally distributed in the forest. If you go to a forest, you have a big patch of berries, and then again, for a bit, there is no berries at all, and then again, another patch of berries. So the optimal strategy is, if you see berries, you check next to it. And if you don't see berries, you move for a bit before you check again. And moods help you do that. And what you realize is that everywhere in the world where rewards are not homogeneously distributed, then it makes sense to have moods. To have moods that tell you when you're not finding success, you just move on. And when you find success, you just keep doing that as long as you find success. And that's what moods do. And that's why they are rational. And then the bridge to ergodicity is that ergodicity is linked to heterogeneity. And the idea of ergodicity is that when things are homogeneously distributed, you behave differently than when things are heterogeneously distributed. Or in another way, you should have two different behaviors depending on whether the distribution is homogeneous or not. And the question, and if you study ergodicity, like there are some mathematical demonstration that it makes sense to have different behaviors. The question is, how does our brain adopt different behaviors without making any calculation? And one of the answers is moods. And the other answer is emotions such as fear. And what I demonstrate in my book on ergodicity, for example, is that if you take a human or an animal, without the animal doesn't know anything about mathematics, anything. He just knows about moods and about fear. And automatically, he will approximate very complex algorithms which have been proven to be optimal for betting and decision-making under uncertainty. And for example, there is a researcher, I think his name is Ed Top, and he won a Nobel Prize, or Kelly, I don't remember which one of the two, sorry, but I'm terrible with names, but one of the two won a Nobel Prize for presenting an algorithm for decision-making under uncertainty. And our brain does not know anything about the algorithm, but just because he can feel excited, he can feel frustrated, and he can feel fear and hunger, automatically it approximates the optimal algorithm. Yeah.
Would I be correct in saying that, let's say an animal is foraging and looking for berries, if it finds them and the intervals that it finds them are spaced out the same, then it doesn't really register. It's not really a big deal. But if they start to come frequently, that's what would increase the good mood. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's kind of the oscillating behavior. Yes.
Okay, so the last question that I had, and I think this is a very appropriate one given the world that we're living in right now, is you talk about vaccination strategies in the book, i.e. people that do believe in them, people that don't believe in them. And you also, I tied this back to something else you mentioned in the book that was very interesting, which is that when you have a population, natural selection will move the average, but it tends to keep a lot of heterogeneity within the species, so that we've got a lot of diversity, which, as we all know, is very important for a species. So that means that if something were to change in an environment and a whole bunch of animals wanted to do something, but a small percentage didn't, is beneficial in the long run, because if it's a thing that's bad, the little population dies out. But if it's something that, or if it's good rather, but if it's bad, then the whole herd will go over the cliff, but the small bunch of contrarians will survive, therefore the species survives. So with all of that in mind, I would like to ask you, given all of your knowledge of human behavior and what motivates people and what incentivizes people, let's imagine that you were approached by a government and they said, there's a vaccine and we want you to help us convince the population to take it. And you had enough information to confirm the vaccine was safe, that you weren't going to be asking people to do anything that was unethical. What kind of strategies would you use to try and, convince as many people as possible to adopt that behavior, but also recognizing that there probably is that small percentage that will resist?
Yeah, so there are a few considerations on these. So one consideration is, like a few months ago, back in December, when we discovered that we would probably have vaccines for COVID, a lot of people, they made polls, and in some countries, like in France, you got, I think, like 40% of the population that said, I will not vaccinate. And one of my reactions was, who cares? Because the reason why most of those people are saying, I'm not vaccinating, is because at the moment there was no one got vaccinated. And I was confident that we could ignore that 40%, vaccinate the 60% that wants to vaccinate, and by the time 60% of the population is vaccinated, then you will see that there will be another 30% of the population that will be willing to vaccinate. And that's because, there is this concept which is called the adoption curve, which is the idea that for any population, you have an early majority which takes decisions whether to adopt a new product solely based on whether they think that the product is good or not for them. And then you have a big majority, and then you have some laggards. And the laggards, they do not care about what the product does. They just don't do anything unless they are coerced or really they cannot do it. And the big majority, they do not care too much whether the product is good for them, but they care about whether other people are using the product. Like, even if they knew that the product is good for them, they will not do it unless they see other people doing it. And so it means that almost necessarily, whenever you want to have a population to adopt something, you cannot try to get everyone to adopt it at the same time, but you need to ride the curve. So it means you need to focus on who believes in the product first. And then once you have enough people that adopted the product because they believe in it, then you can go to the next part of the population and say, look, there are people that are already using the product. And only once you have almost everyone, you can use it, then you can care about the laggards. Now, let's apply this to the vaccine. So I think that it's important to divide the population in these three groups. And so first, you want to demonstrate that the vaccine is safe, it's effective, and so on. You do it, and you will already have part of the population that is like, I want to vaccinate. You vaccinate them, and then that is what will get the other part of the population to say, I want to vaccinate. Now, you will have, I don't know, let's say 5, 10, 20, I don't know, part of the population that doesn't want to vaccinate anyway. Now you can have different ways, different approaches. One approach is, if the vaccine is effective, you do not really need to vaccinate them, because it might be enough to reach herd immunity. It gets a bit more confusing, like if some of those people, they're doctors themselves, or they work in some areas in which they see a lot of patients. That's a bit more confusing, but yeah. And then whether to convince those people, it becomes like mostly an ethical problem. So I will not go into this, but I think that it's important to understand that lot of time you just riding the wave. It's enough to maximize the volunteering population, let's say. Yeah.
That was brilliant. See, that could have been a little nudge stop talk in its own right, and it would have sat on par with all the others. Thank you so much, Luca. Did you have anything else that you would like to talk about? Maybe some of your other books and what they cover before we move over to the questions?
I guess we can just go directly to the questions. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. That's such a super sort of resume of everything that Luca has. My internet's gone unstable. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, super resume. And just looking over my notes, Luca, I've scribbled down brain as a company, absolutely fabulous. Has the report, but not the data. I'm sure everyone else is scribbling furiously as well. No requirements for coherence in our brain. This feels like, you know, one of the deepest lectures I've been to. I've been really scribbling furiously. And I love that Michael brought up mood, because I'm also fascinated about mood, that it's, I mean, I don't know much about it, I will admit, but I know that it's an affected state. And so it's less specific than emotions. And so as Michael says, the whole idea of how our mood affects, and like in UX, affects how we process things. We can't tell why we're in a mood. It just surfaces for no reason and comes over you. So I'm fascinated by the sort of subtlety of the difference between mood and emotion. And I understand that it affects how we process things, which has huge implications for advertising, for example. So I think that's fascinating. So I'm sure everybody's just as interested as I have been, Luca, and we've had some questions coming in there. And I'm just going to scroll back. I'm sure you saw them coming in a little bit yourself. As Michael said, Joanne mentioned about the tiny habits idea of creating a dopamine hit to reward that tiny action. And I think I'm going to go to, now, Mariah, you were asking about activating the emotions component. Would you like to come in, Mariah, to talk to Luca?
Yeah, it just seemed, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can, Mariah, go ahead.
Oh, good, perfect. It just seems that I'm seeing sort of a light motive every time we try to activate emotions, trying to speed up some brain processes. I'm seeing that we're reaching out to the olfactory senses, the smell, the taste, some of those that are nestled in the primitive brain. And somehow those reaching into that depth seems to be the catalyst to move things faster. And I just need your, I guess, I don't know, input into that. Am I on the right track? Am I just saying things because I'm thinking them loud? I don't know. I just need some help with my hypothesis, if anything.
Thanks, Mariah. Well, what do you think about that, Luca, the relevance of the deeper, more profound impact of things like olfactory senses?
Yeah, thank you. I think that olfactory is important in the measure that it drives emotions. What I mean is, like, if for any reason, because you have some associations to a particular smell, then smelling it makes you more relaxed, and that helps with thinking, for example, then indeed it will affect decision making, it will affect action. I do not think that there is anything inherent in smell by itself, but like in the emotions that you might have attached to particular smells, or in other, let's say, other contexts that you might have associated to smells, and that if you feel this particular smell, then it brings that context, and that context goes to change, goes to influence let's say the rest of the thoughts or the rest of like the emotions that you're feeling. So I think that there is this step. So like olfactory, emotions or context, and then emotions, action taking and decision making. And in the measure in which there is some connections here, then of course there will be a connection on the other side. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Luca. I know that you do a lot of work with companies and work experiences. Shrutin, would you like to comment with your question about sort of being settled in a secure job and the interest in it? Are you there, Shrutin?
Hi, Louise.
Hi, Shrutin. Would you like to put your question to Luca?
Sure. It was actually more of a comment, but hi, Luca. Thank you for the session so far. So I was just trying to draw parallels between what you were saying with some of these conversations I have with some of my friends, let's say from school or college, who've been stuck in, let's say, secure jobs, and some of them have kind of admitted themselves that they probably aren't adding much value to their company, but then they're so used to the routine that it kind of keeps them going. Versus maybe others who put themselves in new kind of environments or settings by either learning a new skill, joining a course and doing something completely different from what they've done before. So there, I think they probably are actively kind of changing their environment to then be able to kind of keep pushing themselves, or I don't know, staying alert and creative maybe. So it was more of a comment, or just trying to maybe make sense of it myself.
Thanks, Shrutin. Would you like to comment on that, Luca?
Yeah, I think that like we need to differentiate like different like reasons why people, for example, put themselves to a training, or because sometimes you have like going to a training is simply like the expression of a trait, and that's the one that determines behavior. Like there are some people like it's the trait that caused them to go to the training that will also be responsible for what happens afterwards. Other times, instead, you have people that take the deliberate decision to put themselves to a training because either because they're escaping something, or because they feel like they need to change something, or so I think like depending on the reasons, on what caused to join the training, then you will have different considerations on. So definitely one is like the process that you highlighted. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Luca. And thank you, thank you, Shrutin. And John, would you like to come in with your question, because you were also interested in talking about mood?
Yeah,
John
thanks.
Hildreth? Thanks, John.
I think it's a related question, but I remember some time ago, Luca, you tweeted quite a provocative statement, which really sort of struck me, which was, I know the moment you gave up, it was when you stopped getting signs of improvement. And I thought that related sort of quite closely to what you were saying about the onions and the whole idea of mood, and sort of having signals from your environment that give you an indication of whether or not you're getting better. Forgive me if this sounds like a really pessimistic sort of bringing the mood down question, but I've noticed in myself that I've become a lot less sort of exploratory over time. And what I've found of myself doing is putting myself less and less in a position to even start, so that I can even put myself in a position to start getting those signs of feedback. So I know it's the sort of question that you'd usually ask a therapist, which is why I'm feeling quite apologetic about asking it. But because a lot of the stuff that I've read from you, and I must admit it's been mainly on Twitter, but I will be looking at your books now after this, it's been fascinating. A lot of the stuff that you've written about has been more about the underlying mechanism of what's going on. And that's why I was really interested in your take. And the last thing I'll say is that I thought the difference between what I'm asking about and the example of Bob and Alice looking for food or washing your hands is that I'm more asking about the motivation for adding a positive rather than simply managing a negative, like unclean hands or hunger. So yeah, that was all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think that you struck the two important points. So one is like, I believe that motivation is very strongly linked to evidence of improvement. And I believe that if you do anything that gives evidence, either that you're improving or that you're on the good path or something, then you will get motivated. And lack of this evidence might lead to the motivation. And if you get evidence instead that you are worsening or that you are going into a cul-de-sac, into an irreversible situation, then it will lead to the motivation. Now, how you act on this? And you said, John, something that indeed is one of the things that I do is that I talk very much about mechanism, much more than about actions. And the reason I'm doing it is because mechanisms tend to be true for everyone. And instead, what to do based on that tends to depend very much on the individual situation. And I would be lying if I give you any advice other than try to do something that can give you an evidence of improvement. And if you do it, great. If you don't do it, then you need to iterate on that. And you either need to do it smaller. So for example, you wanted to do, I don't know, you wanted to demonstrate yourself that you can lose weight and you decided to go for a 5 miles run, and then you don't do it, then it means that 5 miles is too much and you should go to 1 mile. And if 1 mile is too much, then you should go for a walk or whatnot. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that you change the context in which you do it. So for example, at work, you cannot get yourself to do something that gives you signs of improvement. Then forget doing it at work and try to do it in a hobby, at the gym, or whatnot, in another context. Or maybe you discover that you cannot do it alone, but maybe there is someone in your life that can help you with. Or maybe it's the other thing, when you are with people, you paralyze, and then you should do it by yourself. And I just don't have the answer, and I don't think that anyone can, unless they're like, they know you extremely well, they can suggest. And I think that the only thing is to iterate, to try. So you set yourself to do something, you put a date, and then if you did it, great. If the date you didn't do it, then it means that you will not do it. And you should just try with something else, something smaller, something in a different context, and you just try to keep doing it until somehow you will succeed, I'm sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Luca. I think iteratively, I think is a nice mantra to try and adopt. So thank you very much.
Welcome. Just today, I tweeted something. No, actually, it was on the mailing list that goes on the newsletter that goes out tomorrow. I said that one of the objectives should be not to do the same mistake twice. And if you do the same mistake twice, it means that you are not touching the root, that you don't know what's the root problem. And so the idea is like, usually, if you don't do something, then it means that you will not do it under the same circumstances. And then the best way to move forward is basically to acknowledge that you're not going to do it, and that you need to do it, either that you need to acknowledge that you will not do it, or that you do it smaller, differently. And differently, I mean, it could be that you will not do it if you put a post-it, but maybe you will do it if you tell your partner that you're going to do it. Or maybe it might be something like, you will not do it if you don't have, if you don't put it in the, if you try to remember it, and then you know that you need to put it in your to-do list. And again, you can just proceed with iteration, but you just know that iteration is okay. And as long as you keep doing different things, yeah, in the book I say like, make sure that the reason why you didn't do it is never the same twice in a row. So that you take all the problems. So for example, I'm saying like, you go running. You decide that you want to go running. And then you decide that you will go running on Friday. and then Friday it rains and you don't do it. Then you change your objective in the next sunny Friday, I will go running. And then the next sunny Friday, you don't go running because, I don't know, you feel muscle pain. And then so you decide that the objective would be that the next Friday you will stretch. And I mean, as long as you keep iterating, at some point you will find what gets you the sense of the action, what gets the sense of improvement. And once you do the first step, it will become much easier.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Luca, and thank you, John. Great question. So I've got a question I'd like to put to you, Luca, and it's more to do with sort of the nature of work and whether you think that we're seeing a change in people's expectations of work. I was reading a book recently, Hustle and Float by Rahaf Harfouche. And what she says is she's talking about the find your calling movement, which kind of made me laugh. And she says, you know, we used to have a job, a career, or a vocation. And this sort of idea of now everybody's work should be a vocation. You know, we find a calling, which is such a high demand, really, for our work. And so I just wondered if, is this a generational thing? Why there seems to be this, everyone saying, oh, follow your dream and find your passion, and how has that changed? You know, how is it people now talk about job as a vocation?
I'm not sure why people are talking more about it. Two possibilities that I'm thinking. One is simply that we are hearing it more, like when someone says it, then it gets reverberated more, communicated more, or maybe it became more acceptable to say it in like places with big amplification. Or the second possibility is because now it's easier than ever to do something by yourself or to learn. Like before, for most jobs, it was a very long process. You couldn't possibly get the tools and the know-how by yourself, or to get, right now instead with the internet, it's easier both to get the know-how and to start without being picked. So you can pick yourself. So I think that that's one of the reasons. Or for myself, I think that one big thing is that you need, like, I don't believe that there are necessarily jobs which are, so I believe that, so it goes into two components. So one component is indeed to find something that you can do it for a long time, something that either is not painful or something that you find that you're passionate or whatnot. But then part of it is also to be able to find the passion in what you're doing, and they are like complementary, and none can work 100% by itself, but none can work by alone. I mean that it's also a skill to find something good, or like to approach your job as craftsmanship, as something that you can put a bit of yourself into. And I think that's a skill. I think that's teachable. And for example, like sometimes I'm talking about this in the context of office work, simply because it's where I do most of my consulting. And one of the things I say is that you need to see your work granular enough so that you can make it yours. So for example, if you're just trying to write, I don't know, a presentation, then it's difficult to make it your thing. I mean, some people can, other people cannot. But you can make it more granular, and you can make, for example, that the formatting in the presentation is really yours, or the choice of words is really yours, or something like that. And the idea is that the more granular you manage to make your work, or at least an aspect of your work, the easier it would be for you to get a sense of progression. Because if you just look, for example, at how well you write the presentation, maybe yesterday you were writing 61% good, and today you're still writing it 61% good, and you don't really see the progression, you don't really get motivated. But if instead you focus on, for example, the formatting, then it's much easier that today you're doing 61% good formatting and tomorrow 62%. And that just thing that you can see a bit of improvement might make it yours. And I think that that's a skill, the skill of changing your work so that you can see improvement in it. And I think that that's one of the things that can bring you more motivation.
Thank you. Thanks, Luca. Yeah, in the book, she talks a lot about the way in which we've spent so many years improving our productivity, but in fact, we're all just busier than ever. And to what degree is this sort of feeling that we need to look busy, or we need to show that we're busy, this sort of need for busyness, becoming more productive, improving productivity skills certainly hasn't reduced our workload, which is sort of the irony of the whole of the book. So Luca, I think that Michael has another question to put to you, so I'm going to hand over to Michael again. Thanks, Michael.
Hey, Luca. So there's been some interesting things developing on the chat that I wanted to touch on. So we know that there's kind of a tension, if you will, between being safe, being secure, and then exploration. And so you see there's a book called Social Intelligence by Goldman, and he talks about if you want people to contribute to charity, the best thing you can do is remind them of how secure they are in their lives. That then frees them up psychologically to want to take more risks to give money out and so forth. And so this came up on the thread. I think Kathleen was one of the people that talked about it as well. If you don't have to worry about shelter and food, if you can pay your bills, then maybe you have the bandwidth to explore your passion. And this was mentioned also earlier in a question that you were asked about feeling like a psychological blocker on being able to explore. So let's say someone's really busy, they're very stressed out, and this happens to me, by the way, as well. I read a ton, and then as soon as I get heavy deadlines at work, I stop reading. And then you always know when my deadlines have gone because I start reading again. Is there anything somebody can do if they're under a perpetual level of stress and their attention is diverted, even if it's not by immediate action, it's just they're thinking about looming deadlines? Is there something they can do, a psychological trick or something, to somehow stop worrying about that or reframe things so that they can then go forward to explore, read, follow anything they're interested in? I'd love to hear your take on that. I have no idea, so that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I think so the premise is very correct. Like there is such thing in the book, I call it risk homeostasis. So the idea that the level of risk that we have influences like the risk that we take. And just to link with what Louise said before, there is also such thing as productivity homeostasis. So Louise asked the question like, why do we have more tools but our productivity keeps the same? And the reason is because we have risks we are exposed at work, such as the risk of being fired because we are perceived as unproductive, or the risk of our boss not liking us. And therefore, the result is that if we get a new tool, the new tool allows us to do what we could do in 1 hour in half an hour. How we are going to spend the half an hour? We're not going to spend it to do double the thing. We're going to spend it to mitigate the other risks. And for example, we're going to spend it to mitigate the risk that our colleagues do not like us, and we will spend more time at the coffee machine. Or we will spend the risk of not being seen as productive, and we will send an extra email, and so on and so forth. Now, to answer your second question, which is how do I take care of the stress which is preventing me from taking risk or from growing? So you mentioned psychological tricks. I do not believe in psychological tricks. Or to better say, I believe that there are certain psychological tricks which work on certain people or on certain conditions. I do not think that there is anything which works globally in every situation for everyone. The only thing that works for everyone is take care of the sources of your stress. Meticulously prioritize, like you can do, like Pareto prioritize. So you rank your sources of stress by which one is causing you the most stress or which one is taking the most time out of your life, and meticulously you try to address them. And of course, it's not the fastest way, but it's the one way that will be the most sustainable, like the one that the results will stay true over the time. And then the first time that you get rid of one of your sources of stress forever, it's really liberating, and you feel like you can do everything. And yeah. I just wanted to answer. There is Lacheza. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Sorry. That is asking,
that's great, Luca. Yeah, I was just going to bring in Lashazar's question. So that's super, because we're getting towards the hour now, and everyone knows I'm very strict about wrapping this up in time so that everyone can enjoy the rest of their Saturday. But as you said, Lashazar is going to close with his question, which is a very practical question, isn't it, Luca? And it's what is your, I hope you don't mind me reading it, Lashazar, instead of you putting it yourself, your approach to pitching new business. So it's a very practical question.
Yeah, so the thing is that I've not been pitching anything in the last 6 years. I've been writing books, giving talks, and then the business is basically coming from people that are like, Luca, I read your book, it's awesome, can you help me doing that thing in my company or something like this? And yeah, so that's what I've been doing, and that's mostly because I hate selling myself, and it's been working, and I'm okay with it. Probably if I pitched, I could get maybe more business, but I'm okay with this, and I really enjoy that it leaves me the time to do my research as well. Before that, when I was working in a company, I wasn't indeed going to pitch to clients. And one thing I would do is to make sure that they have a problem first, that they have a problem I can solve. And the second thing is that I will go there, I will listen, and then they will tell me that they have a problem. And then I will tell them, like, what will you do to solve the problem? And then they don't know how to solve, like they're gonna tell me how they're planning to solve the problem. And then usually the thing was either like, I look at them and then, but you're not gonna do it. And usually, yes, they're not gonna do it. And because otherwise they would just have closed the conversation immediately. And I think that the one thing that I do, like one of the things that I do differently in my books is that not only I'm telling for example, I have 2 books on management, and not only they say what managers should do, but they also say why they will not do it, even after they know that they should do it, and what are the next steps about it. And yeah, but yeah, that's, for the last 6 years, I've not been teaching anything, and I've just been writing books, and that worked great for me.
Well, that's a great reflection on how super your books are, Luca, that people are reading them and coming to you for the business, and you're not having to go chasing it, which is, I'm sure, something that a lot of people are probably quite jealous of. But so what I'd like to do now, Luca, is just to thank you for giving us your time and joining us here. It's an absolute pleasure to hear everything that you've told us. I'm sure everybody's been very interested in, we see the cogs working in your brain, Luca, as you've been answering the questions. So I really, as I say, I appreciate you joining us here today. It's lovely to speak to you in person after having seen you speak so many times. And I'd like to thank Michael for joining us today to put his questions to you. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you in the group who join us so regularly bringing your great questions and making the club what it is. So thank you very much. I'm just going to consult my diary here now to tell you all that Julia Hobsbawm will be joining us next week to talk about the book, The Simplicity Principle. So I hope to see you all here, same place, same time next week. And I hope you have a good rest of the weekend. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next week.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, Luca.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Bye, Joanne. Bye, Shrutin. Thank you.